Sure, but Sibaji, how much of a capex, therefore, are you guys thinking of putting up in addition to what Jonathan said, that you've expanded capacities or set up capex plans already, because you saw this wave coming in? Biosecure is only an addition to that, let's say. Maybe an important addition, but an addition to that. So how are your capex plans changing from what they already were because of the Biosecure Act passage?
Yeah, so I'll answer it in two ways. One, the fact that we could see it coming meant that we have been steadily investing in expansion of our capacity,
Sure.
in building facilities, and also having a lot more automation and digitization in place. So we are well placed to capture the demand that will be seen in the next few years. Going forward, I want to tell you that we have a very strong balance sheet and a capability to invest. So investment is not an issue, but we will be tracking the demand very carefully. We'll be very calibrated in our investment, but we'll not hold back on investment, because this is once in a lifetime opportunity for the industry and for the company. So we will track the demand and we'll invest ahead of time to ensure that we are very well placed when the demand shows up. And the demand will definitely show up because the volume that we are talking about is quite big in context of our industry in India. So we are very confident on the demand, and we'll be planning investments accordingly.
Jonathan, maybe it's a difficult answer to give, but I'm going to try it again. What's the delta of change? I mean, from what you are already doing, now that this has happened, does it take your capex plans up by 15%, 20%, 40%? What's the delta? Is it possible to predict that?
Yeah, it's possible to predict it. I'm not sure it's possible for me to share it with you. You get the premise of the question. Coming at it another way, Niraj. Look at our performance so far through this year. We've seen this drag effect on the entire industry of the US biotech sector having a bit of a reversion to the mean and new capital deployment. There's a lot of biotechs that are splitting into the haves and the have-nots in terms of funding. Those that have got funding are spending it. Those that are still in the refunding cycle are, being very, very sort of closed on their expenditure. And you've seen that talked about. That's really colored the first half of the year. That's what we talked about that we expected. Then we saw, a little bit of year-over-year decline, not a lot of growth. In the first quarter, we predicted that the second quarter would be similar. But our full year guidance, you can impute from that, you can back calculate, has a return to growth starting from the third into the fourth quarter, and it's quite healthy growth. I think that answers your questions around, are these RFPs turning into real work? Are we doing anything? It's happening already. But we'll wrap it up as we do in our annual guidance. So when we get to the year end, we'll talk about next year's capex, next year revenue expectations, and we'll bake it up into the normal conversation we have with our shareholders and investors. But it's implied in the second half that we see a good rebound towards some growth.
Jonathan, I'm sorry, but this is something that you told me even before the passage of the Biosecure Act, right? So that you were anyways anticipating with the return to the spends, R&D spends, etc. I'm trying to get, is there an additional delta because of?
No, that's almost correct on the time course. But the passage through the lower house in the US, it's the political cycle playing out. The drafting of the bill predates that. The discussion around the rotation goes back 2 or 3 years. You and I have been chatting for at least 3-4 years around what about China rotation, what about cyber security, the lens of it at one point. So that's part of my point. It's a structural shift. It doesn't all get tied up in one piece of legislation.
Which is fair call. Okay. Last couple of questions before we wrap up. Sibaji, to you first. Are there numbers that you want to add? I mean, I completely buy Jonathan's point that there are some numbers that you can arrive at, but you can't share right now for whatever reasons, and it's completely fine. But are there numbers around, let's say, the CDMO book as it stands right now, and the optimism or the hope that you might have about what it could be like, let's say, 24 months out?
So obviously, when we give the guidance, we'll build and, as Jonathan, wrap it all into that. But very positive about how we are seeing the trends. And in 24 months out, we expect to see a much stronger top line than we have at this point of time. Good growth coming from second half, and we expect that growth to sustain next few years.
Yeah.
So we'll not give you an exact number, but very
No, not on the
optimistic.
guidance, sorry, but just the order book. I mean, order flow from at the CDMO end. Just that. I don't want a revenue guidance because I'm sure you'll give that at the end of FY25 or FY26, so which is fine.
Yeah. Yeah, and the order book is building up, and the order book is building up initially through pilot projects and test projects, but many of those have the potential to convert into big opportunities for us. So as I said, execution is key, and we'll be focusing on execution, and we'll be very optimistic on how it shapes up over the next 24 months.
Fair call.
Yeah, Niraj, just one bit. Broaden the lens from the CDMO bit to CRDMO. Don't forget the research services. Actually, the research services are the more portable, easier to move part of that work, partly because they inherently have a shorter cycle, but also they're a little bit easier to transport between vendors. So they're not quite as sticky. So I think you'll see growth there just as quickly as you'll see anything on the CDMO side.
Got it. Jonathan, my final question to you, and you had told me once in the past that it's not that the West is coming to East, even East is going West, right? In some sense, capability of the Indian firms or firms like yours and others are very high. Just trying to get this picture out of the way, get this ball out of the way. The work that will come in to Indian companies because of this rotation out of China, the underlying trend and biosecure, etc., would it be value accretive to the existing work that you're doing, or could it be volume accretive but maybe margin dilutive?
Gosh, I'm hoping it's in the middle. Actually, I think it's value. It's volume accretive, but I don't see any reason why it should be at a lower margin for us. It's pretty much it depends on the mix, of course. It's the same book of business that we already have. It's the same services provided to very similar companies.